Greetings everyone. Welcome to today's lecture on Women at Work, some reflections on medieval India. In this interesting topic, we will be talking not only about elite women or women belonging to royalty and the enterprising roles that they were performing, but we will also be talking about the subaltern women, women belonging to the ordinary houses, belonging to peasants' family, artisans, etc., and how they contributed immensely to medieval production process. Here, I would like to share Gerda Lerner's understanding on gender. Gerda Lerner has postulated that patriarchy is a system of social structures as well as practices in which men manage dictatorially and they exploit and encumber women. In fact, men have had access to control over a woman's labor and also disposition over her productivity both within the household as well as outside. So it means that they are dominating both in the private sphere as well as in the public sphere. Gerda Lerner has explained that how complicity of women in relation to ancient Mesopotamian civilization indicated their upholding of the patriarchal system which subordinated them and which they in return transmitted to the next generation as an automatic mechanism under conditions of economic and political dependency. So, as has been pointed out by Gerda Lerner, patriarchy works through paternalism, and how women successfully internalize this becomes the game changer. It reinforces the sexual division of labor which is attained through a variety of means. So, there is something called gender indoctrination, then educational deprivation, creating cleavage by defining righteousness and deviance according to her sexual activity by a number of restraints as well as outright persuasion. So, therefore, what emerges is more and more strengthening of the patriarchal influence. Although women's and men's tasks overlapped in the pre-industrial era, there were strict ideas about their respective tasks within the specific community. Women's work in India, unlike men's, was shaped and monitored predominantly by patriarchal authorities at home as well as outside. A number of studies have appeared on women, and there has been an attempt to study the active role that women played in the past. So, we have scholars like Rafat Bilgrami, Shireen Muswi, Ayat Siddiqui, George Kozlowski, who have focused on the socio-economic and political activities related with medieval women. Most studies on medieval women focus on the social and institutional aspects, for example, family, kinship, state, etc. And we have a number of scholars who have worked in this domain like Vijaya Ramaswamy, Varsha Joshi, Kumkum Sangari, Kumkum Roy, Uma Chakravarti, to name a few. Now, one must also highlight what are the sources that are available to someone who is interested to know more on the subject. So, there are standard Persian histories such as Tabaqat-e Nasiri, Tarikh-e Firoz Shahi, Ain-e Akbari, Akbarnama, then Muntakhab-ul-Tawarik, Mirat-e Ahmadi, etc., where one does find some references to women's work as well as the social understanding concerning such work. Then there are a number of Sanskrit sources like Lekha Paddhati, which has been very useful as far as understanding about the working of slave system in medieval India is concerned. The political role of Rajput ladies has been visualized largely from Rajasthani Rani Vasiyon ke Patra. Then there was another relevant source which can be quoted here is that of Rahim, that provides an extensive insight into various castes and their specific professions. Then some of the Persian documents, for example, the Surat documents, Cambay documents, Allahabad documents, then Malfuzat literature, both in Persian as well as Urdu, then Khairul Majlis and Fawad ul Fawad are specifically useful to have an understanding. And one can also mention a number of English official records as English factory records, 13 volumes, and a number of letters that were received by English East India Company from its servants, which have been compiled in 6 volumes for understanding the mercantile history of women, because Mughal women definitely played a very active and an important role in mercantile history of India. Then there are a number of travelogues, English as well as other languages translations. Though exaggerated many a times, they largely account for a vast literature on India. For example, Al-Biruni, Ibn Battuta, Thomas Roe, Bernier, Tavernier, then Barbosa, Manrique, Manuki, etc. Now, what do most of these sources indicate? And what emerges out of an understanding that can be gauged from these wide variety of sources? One thing that emerges is that there was something of a continuum between the market and the non-market performance. So the combined performance of domestic labor with agricultural, artisanal and mercantile tasks not only resulted in a continuum between the domestic and rest of the labor, but also it combined market and non-market sphere. Then women were not only playing a very important role as producers, but also as consumers. Women of several classes were major consumers of products, and their preferences clearly must have played a significant role in determining the character of the market. The aesthetic interest of women largely determined the quality of imports from overseas as well, and there is definitely a reference to the karkhanas where different commodities were made depending on the demand of such commodities. Next, one can talk about the issue of gender-based division of labor. In medieval India, women played an important role in the organization of production, though the division of labor was largely based upon gender. Women provided assistance in so many activities like agriculture, planting seeds, smoothing and weeding of plants, husking as well as winnowing grains. And most of the contemporary records, they kind of mention pounding and grinding of grains that was largely accomplished by women. Then we have Fawad ul Fawad, which mentions that women sang praise of Almighty while carrying such household chores. Then there was a domestic handloom industry which was carried by using the skill of women, and Amir Khusro has linked needle and the spindle that was used by young women with spear and arrow. Then Isami has also pointed out that how women were suited only to work on the spinning wheel. Then there were a number of Sufi women who are known to have been involved in this profession of spinning in order to earn a humble livelihood. So, when we are talking about women at work, there were a number of functions that they were performing. They were running shops, selling commodities in the market, and there is reference to a common woman, Chamu, who was running a shop in Delhi where she used to sell opium. Then there were saints who employed the females in several ways. The Sufi saints in Khankas, they were definitely employing a large number of female slaves so that these Khankas could function properly. Women were exempted from paying the religious tax jizya, and they, for some point of time, even held iktas and enjoyed the privilege after the death of their husband. However, this practice was discontinued by Sultan Balban, and now these widows were only given allowances. Most wealthy households included extra household female members such as mistress, wet nurses, slaves, and concubines. A large number of women were employed as maids, and this was particularly so among the richer families, so that the work of the women of the families was lessened, as most of the manual work was assigned to these helpers. Now, these women were also playing a very important role in entertainment, and they were active participants in Majlis-e-Sultan. Majlis-e-Sultan used to be some kind of a merrymaking, a party, a get-together, and Barni has referred to a number of charming musicians of his court, like Futuha, who was the daughter of a cupbearer. Then there was Nusrat Khatun and her daughter Mahar Afroz, as forming a brilliant galaxy of musicians at Jalaluddin's court. Then Nusrat Bibi, Dukhtar Kasa and Mahar Afroz were also dancers par excellence. And Amir Khusro has also mentioned Turmati Khatun, who was a remarkable singer. Then there was another institution known as Tarbabad. Now, what was this Tarbabad? It was some kind of a pleasure spot with different additions that were there, like mosques, markets and residential areas of the dancing girls as well as musicians. Now, these Tarbabad residences were tastefully decorated and furnished with dining rooms and shops, which contained inner apartments in which the decked up female singers and dancers, they used to kind of greet the visitors, and all the musicians, both male as well as female, they used to perform here. So, entertainment was a very important activity in which women were skilled. They were skilled in playing instruments like flute, majamir, tabla. They could write, recite verses, relate stories. Then also they could play musical instruments like sitar, painting, swimming, riding were other means of entertainment. And Amir Khusro also considered singing and dancing as rather unacceptable for respectable women, as it brought ill fame to them. So, there were definitely biases, and especially so if women were indulging in some activities. Then we have a number of references as well as paintings which refer to women playing polo, chaupal as well as chess. There is a reference to Turmati or Trimati Khatun, who had a very melodious voice, and she was also well accomplished in playing veena, sitar, sarangi, and in fact she was leader of all the Iranian as well as Indian musicians of the court. Then one cannot miss the role played by the dancing girls, who actively participated in most of the ceremonial occasions like the birth or marriage in the royal household. Now, having performed so many diverse functions. Now, the next very important aspect that I would be discussing is that of slavery. In the Sultanate economy, female slaves played an indispensable role, and especially if we are talking about domestic slavery. Slaves were generally referred to as bandagan, banda, ghulam, kaneez and mamluk, as is visible in a number of sources of Delhi Sultanate. And in Delhi Sultanate, slavery ranged from elite military slavery to menial slavery. And of course, the female slaves were, confined to this domain of domestic slavery or menial slavery, and they were much more in demand than the male slaves, as they were needed both for domestic service as well as for the pursuit of pleasure. In India, they were supplied from different countries as well, as far as China, Eastern Europe, as well as in the West. So there were different regions from which these slave girls were procured, and Burney has referred to the fairy faced girls who were specifically trained in singing ghazals. Now, a number of women were also captured in war, and some were presented by the king to the nobles, or some were sold. Then we have a source called Lekha Paddhati, which has mentioned that how women slaves were performing a number of household works like grinding, cutting, mopping the floor, sweeping, fetching water, milking cattle, as well as agricultural work. Then another very important and much talked about institution was that of concubinage, which again referred to how the rights of these women were never on an equal pedestal. The sultans gave liberal patronage to the concubines, but they did not enjoy the status of a married wife, as the children born from them were generally deprived of various privileges as well as opportunities. And here we also have an example of Kai Khusro, who had been nominated by Sultan Balban in his will to be the next in command, but the elites in his realm overlooked the claim of Kai Khusro, as he was not born of a legally wedded wife. So the nobles considered it improper to extend support to the son of a concubine and elevate the offspring of such a union to the throne of Delhi. There were several kinds of female slaves, and the two most important were those who were involved in domestic and menial service, and those who were brought for the company of their masters under various forms of concubinage. The former performed more rough and manually challenging domestic work, while the latter had a more honorable and sometimes even a dominating position in the household. Here we can give example of Shah Turkan, and Minhaj-us-Siraj in his Tabaqat-e-Nasiri has mentioned that Shah Turkan, who was wife of Sultan Iltutmish, was originally a Turkish handmaid who gradually rose to the status of chief queen of the Sultan's harem by due to her merit as well as her charming personality, and she was even honored with the title of Khuda Wandae Jahan. Then there were female slaves who were mentioned by Amir Khusro in his Ijaz Khusravi as displaying some very important and special skills. The female slaves were also considered as gifts of war. There was no restriction on the purchase of female slaves who could be brought and sold like ordinary commodities in the open market. Ibn Battuta has informed us that women taken as captive during war were generally distributed amongst the nobles and officers as slaves. the institution of concubinage became the social instrument for integrating captive women into the household of their captors, thereby assuring their captors not only their loyal services, their manual labor, but also those of their offsprings. So, it was something like a chain reaction, and once incorporated into slavery, there was no looking back. The sale as well as purchase of mistresses was tax free, and the birth of a son could raise the status of a concubine where the paternity of child was known. Now, there were a number of royal women who were performing some other important functions like writing letters, and they were actively interested in these literary pursuits. So, they worked as tutors to others, and they carried through this activity by adopting calligraphy, by learning calligraphy, writing letters or the representations, which were very important source of income, and also it gave them lot of prestige. Then now I would like to talk about a very interesting and unique source of knowing about women's history and how they were actively participating in the production process, and this source can be referred to as the paintings. So, a number of paintings of this period belonging to the Mughal, Rajasthan and Pahari school can be used as important medium for understanding. The presentation of the rural scenes often captures glimpses of social life of ordinary men and women as well. As you can see in this visual, women at work. Then another interesting image was that of a female performer with a tanpura. This image belongs to 18th century, and it captures not only the beauty of the singer, but also the importance of the musical instrument that, and also the activity in which she was indulging. Then here you can see a Mughal prince and ladies in a garden, showing that how there were women who in the company of the prince were often shown as roaming around freely, though this was not the usual norm for women. Then they were performing a very important function of carrying water. So, as water fetchers from the village well, this was a very important task that was done by women, and as has been pointed out by Waklate Mushtaki, several Rajput women were filling water from the well, and this was part of their daily routine. As has been pointed out by Fryer, Indian wives fetched water and ground their corn with a hand mill and sang, chat and made merry. But while they were doing all this, they were also performing such important functions for the family. Then another very important activity was related to cattle as well as milk. In addition to performing domestic labor, women could be seen in the fields looking after cattle as well as making milk products, which was another very important sector of women's work. The feeding of the cattle was a part of their domestic course, as is visible in a number of paintings. Then in next visual that you can see is that of a woman bringing food for her husband, as is depicted in the collection of Anware Suheli. Then another very important function performed by women, and that too for royalty and even for others, was that of playing the role of a midwife. Again, which you can see the scene that is depicted on the screen, and it has captured such minute details that how women were playing such a crucial role. then also as a wet nurse, which again was a very important and much in demand function that was performed by women. So therefore, as we discuss these different roles that were performed by women at various points of time, especially during the medieval period, we can say that women's role as well as work was crucial in the maintenance of the household economy. Women's labor actually constituted and sustained the household as a viable social and economic unit. And if we compare it to present times, again we can say that this was something of a replication which is going on now also. However, their labor in the household was systematically devalued and delegitimized under the prevailing patriarchal ideology. Thank you.